Yes, welcome to Care, Share and Inspire, the Climate Wisdom live from COP28 in Dubai, UAE. We bring together experts from science, spirituality and politics to explore new avenues for the unfolding climate disaster. Myself, I'm Golo Pilz, and I'm the advisor on renewable energy to the Brahma Kumaris, and I will be tonight's moderator. Last week has arrived of this climate conference, and negotiators are working overnight. Tasneem Essop, the executive director of Climate Action Network, which is made up of more than 1,600 civil society organizations in over 130 countries, he said, "We have very clear demands towards this COP. First, just and equitable phase out of fossil fuel. This is the big elephant in the room. Second, rapid phase in and scaling up of renewable energies. And third, finance must be provided for the developing countries to carry out this transition. And all three parts are interconnected and essential." However, the climate talks have reached an impasse over whether to phase out fossil fuels or not, with just a day and a half of negotiating time left. That's why Sultan Al Jaber, the president of this year's conference, urges all nations to be flexible and to come up with solutions to reach a compromise. So we have to see. Tonight, I heard the latest news is that they just published a new text. And tonight will be a crucial meeting at 8 o'clock, and probably they will work through the night. We will keep you posted on the latest updates. I'm very glad to have tonight three distinguished speakers with me. Next to me sitting Dr. Flavia Bustreo. You are an eminent physician, public health professional, and advocate for the health and human rights of women, children, and the elderly. And you are currently the vice chair of Foundation Botna, co-chair of the Lancet Commission, and you are also on the ethics committee at the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. Welcome very much to our program tonight.
Thank you. Very honored.
I'm also very glad to have Professor Dr. Mark Lawrence with us. You are the scientific director of the Research Institute for Sustainability in Potsdam, which is near to Berlin. And the institute develops problem understanding and solution options in cooperation between science and politics, administration, economy, and civil society. The research approach is transformative, transdisciplinary, and co-creative.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
I'm not yet finished.
Oh, no.
Your main research areas include air pollution, climate change, climate geoengineering, and the interface between sustainability and spirituality. In addition, you are the co-author of 180 peer-reviewed publications. Welcome to our panel discussion.
Now, thank you for the invitation.
And I'm very glad to have with us tonight Maureen Goodman. You're the program director of the Brahma Kumaris in the United Kingdom and also the representative to the UN in Vienna. You have been already to several climate conferences and have a deep interest in the spiritual and ethical dimensions of climate change. Since long, you have been involved in the interreligious dialogue, and you represent the Brahma Kumaris on the board of religious leaders of the Elia Interfaith Institute, and you are a spiritual ambassador to the Living Peace Project. Welcome very much to our tonight panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So let us straight away start with our questions. Flavia, in many regions of the world, climate change is already undermining public health. I know this is very close to your heart, and you are, since many, many years, involved in public health. And usually women and children, they do suffer most. What brings you to this climate conference, and what are the key actions this COP has to agree upon to reverse the trend and restore public health?
Thank you very much for that question. And indeed, it is close to my heart. This is an engagement that I've had since the time I was at the World Health Organization, leading all the group that is working on family, women and children health. And we engage much before the Paris COP, with the intent to show the impact of climate change on human health. We used to say climate change and human health are two faces of the same coin. And we did an intensive lobbying leading up to the Paris Agreement. And in fact, if you read the agreement, you will see that the right to health is acknowledged in the agreement, and it's acknowledged in the text of the agreement. And that opened the door for the recognition of these linkages between this phenomenon. But this COP, we have seen an intensification of this recognition. For the first time, the COP presidency has acknowledged a health day. And during this COP28, we had the Director General of the World Health Organization. We had almost 50 ministers of health that participated to the high-level ministerial. And of course, as you said in your question, they recognize that women, children, and adolescents, their health pay a higher price. Why? The newborn, particularly the small children, because their physiology, they breathing more rapidly, they are more sensitive to high temperature, so they are more exposed also to the increased infectious diseases that are caused by the increase in climate, in temperature, especially malaria, diarrheal diseases. So the small children have a particular susceptibility, but also women, especially during their reproductive years, and especially at the time of delivery. So we have data, for example, that the complication of delivery are far increased, both for the hot temperature, for the impact of flood, and also for the impact on the health system itself. So the question that you ask, what are the key action? The key action, one key action, the recognition of the problem has happened. The second key action that is not happening yet is that in the national determined contribution, which are the plans that countries have, they need to include responses that addresses health, particular health of women and children. And then the third action, which is even further down the line, which is we are very engaged in advocating for it, is financing. Because currently, for example, of the funds that go of the climate financing, only 5% goes to health. And there are opportunities, there are different instruments like the Green Climate Fund has opened a window. There are opportunities also linked to the new mechanism like the loss and damage. But these mechanisms are not gendered, so they do not really look at the necessity and needs of women. And most importantly yet, they haven't addressed health.
Thanks very much for sharing so much information in this short moment. And what I remember recently, I read about the wet bulb temperature, that nowadays many countries, especially also here in this region, in summertime, they cross this wet bulb temperature where you actually cannot be in the open anymore in daytime because the body cannot transpire any longer and cool down. Isn't that sad? That we have reached that state. Wonderful that you shared with us also what action the COP has to take. This brings me to Mark. Mark, you're here also at the COP and you are promoting an approach which is transformative, transdisciplinary and co-creative. These are very special words and I had to look them up, what it actually really means. Can you explain a bit what's behind this idea? And second part of the question is, it seems the nations of the world have yet not reached a common ground. What's going wrong at the COP in terms of communication, for example? It seems somebody's talking, the other person is not listening. And this conversation is also not transformative. What's your advice? What's going on?
Well, the second part of the question is perhaps easier. They're not using enough transdisciplinary and co-creative processes. But what are those processes? Well, I wrote a 20-page review paper about those at the beginning of last year. And so it can take quite a while to explain the depths of it. But the basic idea behind transdisciplinarity is that scientists have typically claimed knowledge generation for themselves. In fact, in the German word for science, Wissenschaft, it means you're creating knowledge. So they claim the knowledge generation for themselves and often forget that there are forms of knowledge throughout society. There's religious and spiritual knowledge, there's political knowledge, there's indigenous knowledge, there's journalistic, investigative knowledge, and so on. And so what transdisciplinarity in our use of the term, in our interpretation of it does, is it brings together societal stakeholders in the research process. From the beginning, when we define the problems that we're looking at, rather than the typical way of scientists saying, oh, there's something here that we read about in the newspapers or we find is interesting scientifically and we'll do our research on this, and then at the end, we'll publish a policy brief and share it with the policymakers. But it brings them in at the beginning in defining the research topic, defining, understanding what needs to be done. It brings them in the process, throughout the process, in particular in terms of accessing these other forms of knowledge and trying to integrate these forms of knowledge together. And then finally, it disseminates the information that's been learned not only in a scientific publication and then one simplified version of a policy brief out of that, but rather thoroughly into the two communities. And that's a quick definition or description of what transdisciplinarity is about. And transdisciplinarity should not replace science, it should supplement scientific research. It adds on to it, it adds a framework to it that allows a closer interaction with the societal stakeholders that are involved in the problems, that are affected by the problems, and that can be involved in helping to develop solutions that have a much greater potential for actually leading to a more sustainable society. Co-creation is a sub-part of that where it has to do with formats of close interaction between the various stakeholders. And the transformative part is that we work on research that helps to support the transformations, not just research about the transformations, but research for the transformations. That's why we also call our institute the Research Institute for Sustainability. It's not a sustainability research institute, but it's one for sustainability. And so hopefully bringing about this will be a step towards what needs to be solved at the COPs. But what really needs to be solved at the COPs, we can discuss for quite a while longer about that because there are many problems that we have underlying that.
Thanks very much for sharing. And I remember in old days, scientists were sort of universal scientists which sort of looked at the whole picture, and now the trend was actually since 200-300 years that science has also fragmented and specialized and more specialized. It's like a tree with many, many branches. So basically you try to bring it together and you bring all stakeholders right from the beginning into the process of generating knowledge and making it, providing in such a way that it's transformative. That's a very nice approach, and I would say that the COP would definitely benefit if such kind of methodology would be applied more deeply. Thanks very much for sharing. Maureen, you're a well-known, accomplished spiritual leader, and I know you have great love for nature and also a deep feeling for justice. You have a very busy schedule, and it's not easy to bring you into the COP, and you carved out more than a week to be here with us. What's your personal motivation to come to the COP, and how is it related to your role as a spiritual guide?
Thank you very much for having me and for the question. But I just wanted to comment as well that centuries ago, religion and science were together, actually. So that's even further. I do feel it's very important because this is an emergency and this is the biggest crisis of our time. So that motivates me to definitely to be here. And how it relates to, you know, the spiritual philosophy and so on. I think that the people of faith, the faith-based organizations, those involved in religion and spirituality, are at the COP to help the governments or the different stakeholders see a bigger picture. Because in the deliberations and in the decision-making, very often it's very short-term goals that are seen, and often it's greed and it's arrogance that tends to dominate, and there's very little space for wisdom. And really, if we want to have the future flourishing of humanity, and not just sustainability, but flourishing, you know, I remember someone once in a panel saying, if I said to you that your marriage is sustainable, what kind of marriage would it be? So we need to move to a state of flourishing. But hard decisions have to be made. And I was very interested to read the speech by the president of Colombia. And he's saying that, okay, Colombia is a country that's dependent on oil and gas, but yet I'm saying we need to phase out fossil fuels. And he said, and people may say, why is the president committing economic suicide? But he said, it's not economic suicide. If we don't take these decisions, then it's, I think he used the term ethnocide, or actually the suicide of humanity. And so he said, what am I going to choose? Am I going to choose the economic goals, or am I going to choose life? And I have to choose life. And I was very inspired by that. And so I think this is the perspective. A spiritual perspective helps to see the bigger picture and the longer term consequences of the decisions that we make.
It's very lovely what you said, that spirituality chooses the life. Isn't that nice, this connection? Thank you very much for sharing what brought you here. And this brings me to Flavia. The UNFCCC and the negotiations are dominated by men. And women carry lots of wisdom and have a more caring attitude towards creation. There's a famous pop song by James Brown, and it's a man's world. It's a bit strange song, but very interesting. Many know it. And the lyrics is quite revealing. He says, without woman, it would be nothing, nothing. Not one little thing, and man is lost in wilderness. And man is lost in bitterness. He will be lost without the woman. It's quite interesting, this song. By the way, this song was written by a woman, but James Brown took the credit. So very, very typical what happened. So my question is humanity lost if we not bring women finally forward?
Well, I'm not sure whether humanity will be lost. That is a strong statement, but I can tell you, I refer to the lobbying we did for having the right to health in the Paris Agreement. That achievement was primarily by a strong group of women. That included Dr. Chan, at the time she was the Director General of the World Health Organization, Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland. She's a strong advocate for the elders, and she's still here with us advocating. Amina Mohammed, she was at the time the Minister for Environment of Nigeria. She's currently Deputy Secretary General. So, and there were some women negotiators, and we purposely approached them. Venezuela was one, several ones. So I think the fact that women are not, they are certainly the minority among the negotiators, and the fact that the negotiations have been driven by men, I think has been a drawback for sure. Then also one thing that I like to point out is that when you look at the financing and the financing instruments, at the way that these financing instruments are designed, they are not gendered. They don't look at the vulnerability the different populations have, and they don't look, for example, very rarely these instruments that are called social protection instruments that are adapted and are supporting of women for different shocks. Those could be like conditional cash transfer that support women. They can support women whether, for example, they are in the conflict. They can support women whether they are in a domestic violence situation. They can support women in the aftermath of flood. Or so the fact that there are no women involved in this negotiation, it also means that certain instruments are not chosen because there is no insight. And so that brings us to the theme, bring wisdom to that table, to that negotiation. And I think the other aspects that also, the wisdom that you bring, I also wanted to say at the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health that I am associated with, we actually really use the interdisciplinarity that you spoke of. And our briefs, they're always designed, we have 10 constituencies, the government, the private sector, the academic, the young people, the NGO, the faith-based organization. And they are always designed with those people input. They start with the questions that these people would want. In fact, the young people, they are always very, very clear. They tell us nothing about us without us. So we cannot design anything about young people and the impact of climate change without them.
Wonderful sharing and bringing a bit light how important is the role of women in the negotiation process and their wisdom, you know, their attitude of caring also for creation, you know. And let us hope the COP will bring these issues a bit forward and include women's perspective more, and in future also have more women negotiators, because once you have more women negotiators, the gender issue, of course, will be taken up more deeply.
And there is one more point, if I may, which is since Paris, there has actually been a gender action plan that countries, the parties have agreed. However, in the words of the former executive secretary of UNFCCC, she said this week, during the Gender Day, she said that plan was not financed and is not implemented. So, you know, it's not just the words that people agree, but it's also the deeds. And this is where the commitments needs to come.
Yeah, there is the gap between the words and the action always. But there is a good point I like to mention. The Brahma Kumaris, which is partly involved in organizing this studio, is administrated by women and especially by elder women. And we take a great care of their wisdom and we try to implement it in our day-to-day life. And that makes our institution actually quite unique in the world, you know. So let's hope this topic will come more to the forefront. Mark, I have a totally different question to you. I know your expertise is also in geoengineering. And there's a lot of talk going on at this COP on geoengineering. And I think here at the COP, there is a record number of companies and lobby people advertising their ideas to remove the carbon emissions by some magic machinery from the atmosphere, or they even propagate using artificial intelligence, do some programming, artificial intelligence will do the rest, or create indoor vertical farms to grow food, to escape to Mars and colonize it, and even solar-powered responsible yachts are being advertised. I've seen an advertisement for a big green solar-powered yacht. So all sorts of things are going on in that field, and they give the impression that one of the solutions might be technology. Now they promise to fix the climate, give a quick fix, and avoid the ecological breakdown. Is more high-tech the solution? Or would it not be smarter to avoid the emissions altogether and change the whole paradigm? What is your idea on geoengineering, and if it would not be easier to avoid the emissions?
Boy, that's a big question. We only have 20 minutes left. But I'll try to bottle it in quickly. But first I want to, actually, when you say responsible yachts, that makes me puzzle over in the first place. I mean, what is a responsible yacht? Unless it's being used to maybe pick up drowning refugees, or if it's being used to help transport people and goods to places where it's needed and so on, if it's being used for parties and so on, there's always this boundary between how much luxury do we allow ourselves and where does it become irresponsible? And everybody for themselves will draw that line differently, and that's part of what makes this question so difficult. But the responsible yachts, I want to go back to two things that Flavia said very briefly. One of them is, I really appreciate your enthusiasm about the effectiveness of transdisciplinary work. And many people are working in a transdisciplinary fashion and don't tag it as that. We're trying to explicitly come to a better understanding of what kind of lessons do we have that can then be used to help make that even more effective. And second, humanity. And this goes to responsible yachts and humanity. I'm not sure that we can lose humanity because I'm not sure that we have humanity. In my viewpoint, we have humankind. We have a species that exists in this world, but humanity has the root word humane. And as long as we are repressing half of the world's population or more, on all sorts of diversity criteria. But as long as women have been and are continuing to be repressed to such a degree in so many parts of the world, it's hard for me to actually call that humanity. So I think we have a lot to rescue. We have, and part of that, in order to make an environment in which we can then grow into a humanity, we need to, of course, protect the climate. And I think that technical solutions will be an important part to being able to protect the climate. Technical solutions of all forms, from the catalytic converters that we put on cars, to the more efficient refrigerators that we have, to the wonderful solar power projects that happen to be conducted by some people that I know in various places in the world. All of these forms of technology will be important. And I think also in the further future, technologies for removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere will also be important. But in a paper that we published a few years ago, together with 10 other major scientists in Europe thinking through this, and it was based on a 200-page assessment, so we had done a lot of background research to this, we concluded that it is highly unlikely that any of the proposed technologies can be ready to actually take carbon dioxide out at a climate-relevant level, so more than 1% or 2% or 3% of our current emissions, before about 2050. Which means all the talk around net zero is actually talk around absolute zero for the next 20, 30, 40 years. If we want to get to what we consider net zero, we can't do that in the near future by assuming we'll have some kind of carbon dioxide removal. It's going to have to be by really phasing out fossil fuels and changing our agricultural practices and changing a few other things. And it's not only CO2, but there are other things that influence the climate, actually at present just as much as CO2. That methane and ozone and black carbon warm the climate as much as CO2. So there's a huge amount to be done. I don't think we'll get the climate issue under enough control that we can have a stable environmental basis for growing into humanity without applying carbon dioxide removal in the further future. And I think if we fool ourselves into thinking that we'll have it in the near future and use that as reasons to postpone the eventual phase out of fossil fuels, we also will end up in a space that will be very, very difficult for humankind and even more difficult for progressing to humanity.
That was very informative, and thanks very much for clarifying that point. I didn't know that we only can achieve 1%. I thought it might be 5% with geoengineering, but 1%. It's quite...
Oh, we will eventually get to more. It's just to get up to even 1% of our current emissions will take us 20 or so years because of all the infrastructure and all the science that's needed behind that and the resources and the energy and the costs that are involved in that. So that will take us up just to get up to that point. We might eventually take out as much as our residual emissions are in the future. So there's some things that will continue to emit carbon dioxide that we will probably hardly get out of as humanity, or hopefully as humanity then. And then we will be able to compensate that in the future. But that's after 2050 or so.
Okay, so better...
There is one point that he raised that is very important to note for the new technology. Who will pay for them? Because at the stage where the negotiations are currently, the low-income countries, the developing countries, they do not have the financing required. So if we introduce new technology, who will pay for it?
Yeah.
All these billions that were promised for the financing of combating climate change, they were not materialized.
So
they did not come.
I conclude it's easier to avoid the emissions.
It's absolutely.
Yes.
Well, it's not getting to the root of the problem,
Exactly.
which is the change of our lifestyle.
All right. So the paradigm has to change.
Yeah.
We have to change our lifestyle, our mindset, and then things will be possible. Technology will follow. Thanks very much for clarification of that. Maureen, right now we have the highest number of violent conflicts since the Second World War. And as a consequence, in this world, there is also a feeling, a sense of insecurity around many, many people. Almost 1 billion people, this is a quarter of humanity, lives in places which are right now affected by such conflicts. And right now, so many more conflicts are erupting. And the United Nations raison d'être, the French word, and means the reason for its existence was to stop any war and avoid any war after the Second World War. This was actually the main idea about that. So peace is a paramount let's say, quality for nations to trust each other and work together. And in climate change, we need trust among the nations so they can find a common solution. So what's the connection between peace and climate change? And why is it so important to address this matter?
All these big questions. Actually, interestingly enough, I was in the Ukraine pavilion today, and there they had a whole display of pieces of trees, samples of soil that have been burned through the war. And they're saying that, I can't remember the figures, but a percentage of the land is now not available for agriculture any longer. And Ukraine has been one of the countries that's been like a breadbasket of a large part of the world. And so the direct consequence of war has had an impact on agriculture, on food, and of course their inability to export, and we all know the politics around that. And it's happening everywhere where there's war. The land directly is being very badly affected. And so it's a crucial connection between peace and climate change. And, you know, we need, again, always from a spiritual perspective, to go back to the roots of things. And where do the roots of violence lie? And actually, our original state is peace, is humanity. We seem to have come a very long way from that. It's as if that original inner peace or inner goodness has really become very buried inside the human heart or inside the human soul. So the conscience is not accessible either. And actually, that's the root of violence, because the first violence we do is the violence to ourselves to suppress that inner goodness. And when you do that, there's a vacuum, you look for external identities, and then, of course, you get into mine and yours and division, and then you can extrapolate it to war. And so we have to come back to our original, natural, spiritual state of being. And so I know that I'm not naive enough to say that, oh, it's going to happen in 5 minutes, but we have to think of the deeper long-term solution, if you like, that will really produce the change that will bring us into that new paradigm, that will really bring us back to a state of real non-violence and peace.
Thanks very much for sharing, and I'm quite happy that at this COP we have a faith pavilion, and there's a lot of effort behind the scenes also going on to unite the religions and build a common ground and have a common voice, because 80% plus of the people are connected to a religion, and that's a very powerful group, I would say. And peace is at the heart of all the religions, inner peace and outer peace, and there's this fundamental connection.
Just to say that, you know, I think since Bonn in 2017 it was, the Talanoia dialogue has taken place, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and many faiths come together for that, and they produce a call that is then presented to the Secretariat, and that's being given a lot of respect to. So the voice of faith is absolutely crucial.
Good story of hope. That the Talanoa dialogue and the faith pavilion are there, and let's. I remember also the Pope was supposed to come, but then he cancelled because of ill health. But it's picking up, and the religions are sort of making their voice heard. Let's hope the decision makers are listening. Flavia, humanity is divided. Climate change is accelerating. The trends are quite clear, unfortunately, you know. And what gives you hope on a personal level? And please share an inspiring moment from the COP with our audience.
Well, it will never cease to inspire me, the energy and the enthusiasm of young people. They have been increasingly participating to the COP. They have a mixture of the understanding, a clear understanding of the dynamics, as well as the frankness and the ability to, you know, speak truth to power that many other players in the COP do not have. And in particularly, am inspired. Last year, I met for the first time 2 young women. They were at the time the coordinator of what is called Yango. Is a group that encompasses all young people that want to participate to do the United Nations processes. And these 2, one Indian, Hita, and one Swiss, Marie Claire, once they finished that, they created a youth negotiator academy, it's called. Okay. So last year, for the first time, they trained 50 young negotiators, and this year again, they had 75. Okay. So that's exciting, and really you can see the eagerness they have to participate. And then at the same time, they are conscious that the situation is difficult, but they are so smart. Like one thing, for example, you can train negotiators, but then will country take them as part of their negotiation team? So what they do is they negotiate before they take the young negotiator to be trained. They negotiate with the country that person will have to be part of the team. So this is the wisdom, wonderful. And these are below 25 years old, to these 2 young women. So it's growing, it's a program that is growing, and if you met with them, next year, I advise you invite some of them to this program, because you will be equally inspired.
That's a great news that this gives you hope. And we have also a youth delegation from Brahma Kumaris, and a couple of days ago they all went to the mangroves here, and they planted some mangroves, and it was a good positive story of joy and happiness. Yeah. And I hope when the youngsters connect to the elderly ones like us, something good will come out.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for sharing. Mark, there is, I read in your CV that you also deal with the impact of spirituality. And there is a connection between sustainability and spirituality, or maybe we say ancient wisdom or ancient tradition. But somehow it seems the fragmentation amongst us and even within ourselves is increasing. Nowadays, people are all the time on the internet, and I think the attention span has come down to 7 seconds or so. We wanted to do some posting on Twitter, and I have no Twitter, no Facebook. I just have email account. I'm a bit old-fashioned. And I said, okay, let's do something. They said, no, it cannot be longer than 7 seconds. And I said, what? And they explained me, yes, 7 seconds, that's it. So this is increasing, this fragmentation and this disorientation also partly. Is there an approach to reverse the trend, to heal ourselves and bring together all the stakeholders? I know this is a very deep, general question, but hopefully you can share your insights.
Well, the question can be answered in 2 ways. The question can be answered as a scientist, then you would really, for that, need to be talking more with psychologists and sociologists that can really talk about the approach to repairing the psyche and what would be needed for that. And I work together with them, but I'm not going to claim an expertise in that. It's part of what's important to me is that we as scientists are often asked to comment on all sorts of things. So I can tell you some about that, but I won't claim an expertise on it. The other side of that is from the religious perspective, and especially meditation. And meditation is well known as a way to bring together more coherence. And in fact, that's been scientifically studied. And I'm familiar with some of the people personally who have done some of those studies of putting meditators in CAT scans, brain scans, and seeing what changes in the brain. And they can show that there's an incredible degree of coherence. I mean, in scientific terms or mathematical terms, 6 or 7 standard deviations outside of the mean of the population for meditators in terms of the coherence when they're in a meditative state versus others when they're in their most calm state. So there's incredible difference. Again, I can't speak authoritatively on that one either. But what I can tell you is that I have, I guess, a decent nose for what is going to be interesting and relevant scientifically and societally. And this is an interface that has interested me, but also drawn me over the last years. We hosted in 2013, already 10 years ago, the first ever workshop on understanding religious and spiritual perspectives about climate geoengineering. Mm-hmm. Since a lot of people were calling geoengineering playing God, And I wanted to understand what that's about. So I invited a number of people, both theologians as well as religious leaders, to come together in a workshop and start discussing this. And that's led to all sorts of work that has gone from then. And that also was part of what led to my close work together with the Interfaith Liaison Committee, first around that topic, now generally around climate change. And so that's one aspect that we've taken on. And the other aspect that we've taken on is trying to understand where the connection is between inner transformation, which has been worked on for thousands of years, and societal transformation, which has perhaps been worked on for thousands of years, but is worked on in a scientific way for the last few dozen years in terms of the transformations towards sustainability as we define it, if we take the Brundtland definition of the Sustainable Development Goals or others. So, and what one of my colleagues at our institute started up a project with us together called A Mindset for the Anthropocene, where we looked at this and we found the two communities where you'd think that there would be a great potential for interaction, they hardly interfaced. And so in that project, we've set up a community website, a networking website, to try to help drive on more interfaces and more work networking between these communities and see what we can learn out of it. And we see there's a great interest, there seems to be a great potential, but in terms of what it can actually do, all I can say is stay tuned.
Wonderful. That's quite interesting to explain this connection between the science and the spirituality, and hopefully they find together, and we have more and more scientists which are meditating. I think that would do good. So, Maureen, this brings me to your last question to you. We often get the feeling that humanity is not up to the task of running spaceship Earth. And in a harmonious manner, let's say. And it seems a bit we lost the path. And one of the core understandings of the Brahma Kumaris, and that's quite interesting because it's a bit touching what you said, one of the core understanding of the Brahma Kumaris is that we are eternal souls or beings of light. And the bodies are our instrument to experience and interact with the world. How does this lack of self-awareness from a spiritual viewpoint erodes our ethical foundations and is related to injustice, consumerism, and ultimately also one of the core reasons for climate change?
You have big questions.
This evening is as...
It's a big question evening.
Panel discussion.
Yeah. Well, it's very fundamental. What is my identity? And so do I look at my identity in external terms, or do I look at it in spiritual, more internal terms? And as I said just previously, we are spiritual beings, our original nature is peace, and that's very much been forgotten. And when we look at our identity in external terms, then first of all we think about probably gender, then we think about our ethnicity, our social status, religious ideology.
Bank account.
Yes, also our bank account and our possessions. All things which give a kind of status in society. And that actually gives us a very false sense of self. Because then that's something that we need to preserve. It's something that's insecure. Because at any moment, my bank balance can go, even gender changes nowadays. So everything is insecure and uncertain. And so I need to come back again to that spiritual identity. Because where we're in that external identity and we're hanging on to that external identity, that's where greed comes in and arrogance comes in. Possessiveness comes in, and there's just so much of those sorts of negative traits that are playing out in the world. And so cooperation, humanity, the sacredness of life, it all gets put to one side because I have to preserve this identity that I've created, and nobody should jeopardize that. And so I become very rigid. And it's conditioning. We're brought up, you know, from the moment you're born, you're conditioned in terms of all of these external identities. And so it's become the way of society. And then it's very hard, because of the prevailing way in which society is functioning, it's hard for people to hold on to that goodness and truth inside, because the influences are so huge. And that's why meditation, spiritual practice is absolutely crucial. And so this is really what we come back to. And all the consequences, including climate change, come from that false identity that we've assumed.
It's very interesting how you explained the connection between the wrong awareness and then falling into the outer identity, and then possessiveness, which is one of the core reasons, core reasons for climate change also, that we want to have more and more and more, and this brings the injustice in the world. Thanks very much for sharing that, and we're running a bit tight with time, but no problem, we can do that. But that brings us to our last question. Flavia, please share in one word your good wish or your blessing for the COP to be successful.
One word would be persistence.
Persistence.
I believe that, and that's what the young people tell us, they are not ready to give up. And I think we, as humankind, should not give up. We have to face this climate change crisis, and we have to face it with truth and persistence.
Persistence, wonderful. Mark, what is your blessing for the COP to become successful?
Well, I'd like to say humanity, going back to the discussion before, but I think we have a long ways before we get to that. So, kindness.
Kindness. How nice. Persistence, kindness. Maureen, what's your blessing?
Well, I was going to say humanity, actually, because although we may be a long way, but that's the blessing that we come to that. So, humanity.
So wonderful. We have persistence, humanity, and kindness. So this brings us slowly to the end of our panel discussion. Time is almost up, and I kindly request Maureen Ben to lead a meditation. Maybe you go a little bit along kindness and things which were mentioned, humanity, which were mentioned right now.
So let me take a few moments to reflect. First, reflect on my identity. Who am I? Am I all those external identities that can change at any moment? Or is there a greater identity of the being? And the being within is constant. The being within, I, the being within, carry many treasures of peace, of love, of wisdom, of truth. When I allow these treasures to surface in my consciousness, it awakens my conscience. And when my conscience is guiding me, every action will be filled with humanity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maureen, to take us beyond. And I would like also to thank our speakers, Flavia, Mark, and Maureen. And I think you inspired our audience, you took care of our audience, and we shared wisdom also for our audience. And we got some good insight into science, into the gender issue, and into also how we see ourselves and how that affects our action and how that is all connected to climate change. And I think this is beneficial for everybody to get a bit more insight into these issues. So thanks very much for joining us tonight. And I'd like to mention also our patrons and sponsors, the Brahma Kumaris, the Kaltaru Tree Plantation Project, the Brahma Kumaris Environment Initiative, Yogis for Future, Radio Madhuban, and India Care. And special thanks to our hosts, the Raja Yoga Center in Dubai, and all the many volunteers behind the camera who make this studio actually possible. It's a lot of work, and behind the camera is a couple of people sitting with technical gadgets, which I don't fully understand, but they're operating them nicely and they make things happen. Please do join us tomorrow at the same time for another interesting session of Care, Share and Inspire. Today was my last moderation. I'm a bit sad about that because I learned so much in these moderations also myself. And tomorrow will be our last panel discussion, which will be moderated by Sonja Olsen. So please do not miss out. For details, please visit our webpage, www.echo.brahmakumaris.org. And last not least, thanks to you, our global audience, for staying with us all the time. And I hope this session gave a good inspiration. Goodbye and good night from Dubai.